Test, test. All right, good morning, everyone. This is our panel. I'm going to have each of our panelists, hopefully if you guys can sit in the order. So I've got Ryan in the middle, and then Amir, and at the end, Genevieve. Thank you. That way we can, if we can put you between the two of them. Oh, sorry, did I get that wrong? No, I got it right. Okay, excellent. So strategic supply chain. We all have different perspectives. We'll do a quick opening and have each of them tell you what their high-level perspective is on that. I run the, sorry, guys in the back, I just touched the mic. I run the Autotech Council. It's a group of car makers and tier one investors and mobility companies who have people on the ground in Silicon Valley keeping their eyes and ears and wallets out for new technologies to invest in both time and money and partnerships. And it really kind of keeps me on that very cutting edge of mobility in terms of where the industry is actually going in the next 5 years. So I have an interesting perspective as well. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ryan to give his kind of top on the strategic supply chain.
Sure, thank you for that. So by way of background, I'm the managing director at Adamas Intelligence. We're focused on the mine to application supply chains for so-called critical minerals and metals, namely rare earth elements and battery metals and materials. So when we look at the current state of the market and what OEMs are thinking, what cell suppliers are thinking, the biggest challenge we see is just the heterogeneity of options available at the battery level. So we have 3 different cell form factors available, 12 different cathodes currently available in North America, a variety of anodes, electrolyte formulations, separators, current collectors, and collectively that creates a significant diseconomy of scale and makes it exceptionally challenging for OEMs, for miners, for cell suppliers to plan even 5 years ahead. So that is today creating challenges that the industry will face tomorrow in the forms of bottlenecks, in the forms of not having the supply chains needed developed in time, and is, in my view, perhaps one of the biggest challenges the industry faces today.
Great, Amir.
So hi, good morning everyone. My name is Amir. I'm the CEO of a company called StoreDot. We've developed a battery, silicon-based battery that can be charged in 10 minutes. Not only that it can be charged in 10 minutes from 10 to 80% state of charge, it doesn't degrade because of the fast charging. So you can always fast charge the battery without compromising on the health of the battery, which includes a very high energy density. We are above 300 watt-hour per kg. So this allows to overcome one of today's most seeable challenge in the EV adoption, which is the charging anxiety. How long will I need to wait in the queue? Or how long will it take to charge my EV car when I need to charge it fast?
Great. Thank
this
you.
is the background.
Right, and Genevieve.
Good morning. I'm Genevieve Cullen. I'm the president of the Electric Drive Transportation Association. My members represent the value chain of electric transportation, so they're vehicle manufacturers, utilities, components and materials suppliers, as well as companies in the infrastructure sector. We are all working to identify all the pieces of this value chain that need to grow. We're looking at a really fast-growing market. We're looking at a lot of important policy pressures to scale even faster, while in fact technologies and markets are still maturing. So we're looking at all of these moving pieces, and as Ryan said, not just one technology. There is innovation and geopolitics that are affecting the market every day. So that's what we're looking at.
Great. So in the premise of the Move America conference, I think what we're trying to get at is fully electric ASAP, right? In the terms of fixing some of the climate damage or making things better in terms of climate neutrality. So with the climate imperative and the fact that transportation can move to battery electric or electric, whether it's hydrogen electric, where do you think we are on the curve? So clearly we would all, at least in this room, we would like to be there faster, but supply chains are one of the things that are getting in our way. Is this a problem that will be solved in 5 years, 10 years? Are there some big hurdles that if we don't solve them today, we'll never get to 100% electric? What do you guys think in terms of where we are in the move to electric?
I'll take the first crack at that
Yeah.
one. That was a lot of questions in a big bucket of questions. But the first question is, I would never say we'll never get there. The question is just how fast. And we are increasingly electrifying. We can't, 0 to 100 is not what we're solving for. We are building the market as quickly as possible, and all of the pieces of it, the technology, the marketplace, the consumer side, building out the infrastructure, and we have to be doing them all at once. And truly, we need to be continually innovating in this space to address, as Amir said, to look at battery chemistries that perform better or cheaper. We need so much more infrastructure, and we need to be doing all the steps in the middle to grow the markets, to make it easier for consumers to adopt, and consumers of every kind, just not passenger vehicles, but in the medium and heavy duty segment as well.
All right. Amir, I think you said in our prep call that it was a very large number of the new passenger vehicles in Israel are electric, 100% electric already?
Yeah, more than 15%.
More than 50%. So clearly, at least in your country, we're well on our way to an electrified transportation system.
Yes, so I think the comment here is absolutely correct. It's not if we're going to get there, the question is how fast and what kind of challenges we will need to overcome to get there. Surely the infrastructure of charging the electric grid is a huge challenge on a nationwide level in all the different countries. Europe, Eastern Europe, Asia, United States. I don't even want to think about other territories like Africa and South America. In addition to that, the supply chain is now a little bit changing in the fact that if in the beginning everybody ran fast on a certain form factor that was available in the market, it was a certain mainly cylindrical with a certain dimensions and a pouch. Now the EV makers, if you ask me, are more mature, do understand more what is their requirements, and for that coming a lot of different kind of form factors with different kind of, even if you look at the prismatic, it can have the terminals on the side, it can have the terminals on the top, and it affects the battery, and it affects the battery performance. So start to dealing with all these changes. Surely we're only in the beginning. At a certain point, I want to believe that there's going to be some kind of uniformity. We're not there yet, but it's going that direction.
Yeah, and just to add to that and put it in a North American context, relative to Europe and Asia, EV penetration in North America is still exceptionally low. There were just around 2 million electric vehicles, passenger electric vehicles sold in the region last year, including hybrids, for a potential market of 20 million or so in healthier times. So we're around 10% of the way there. I agree with the other speakers that it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when and how fast. And I think also, what does fully electric look like? Does that include some amount of hybrids, some amount of plug-in hybrids? And in our view, it likely will. Where the ambitions of OEMs are going, where the investment targets are pointing, is towards full electrification in North America somewhere around 2040. But as I alluded to earlier, and the other speakers have, there are many bottlenecks that will likely appear, many hurdles that must be crossed along that way. So take that with a grain of salt, and I think we can revisit the same topic next year,
Right.
Perhaps with a different view.
Exactly. So we want to be moving faster, but that's one of the reasons that the supply chain is such an important topic, because we are at 10%. We want to be at hopefully 70% by 2030, but we have to solve a bunch of these supply chain issues. So I think I'd like to deep dive into 3 buckets. And of course, the supply chain, we could go many different directions, but based on who we have here, let's take a deeper look at the supply chain just for batteries and battery tech. And if you guys are feeling comfortable, some of the future battery technologies that we may be, and minerals and stuff like that. Then a separate discussion on energy and the grid, and that this getting the supply of energy from wherever it is all the way into a car battery. And then the third is kind of parts and electric motors and materials, and that's the traditional, call it the traditional automotive supply chain that kind of broke recently with the semiconductors and whatnot. So why don't we start with energy? And I think, Genevieve, that might fall to you first. So we have, on a strategic level, have got to fix the charging infrastructure, the speed of charging, so that we can get over a lot of the consumer hurdles, right, with adoption. Not talking about the car guys, but just the users. How do you think we solve those problems? Where are we? What do you see in terms of the energy guys moving in the direction of working on that particular supply chain?
First, I'll just warn you, I'm from Washington, so I'm never going to speak to you in a one solution answer. Everything is a multiple variable answer. It's particularly appropriate here, because when we talk about energy, to use electricity in transportation, we're changing a couple of paradigms. So there's a grid piece of this, there is the charging infrastructure piece, and it's how consumers actually use and how they see what they need, and those aren't necessarily the same things. So on the grid side, you hear a lot of catastrophizing about what will happen to the grid. They can't handle it. Oh, blackouts, look what's happening. I can't even use my air conditioner today because there's strains on the grid. But the fact is, in California, the place where they have the most electric cars in the United States, plug-ins account for 1% of peak demand in California. So over the next 40 years, will we need extra capacity? Yes, we'll need it because we're electrifying the whole economy, and planning for extra capacity needs is what utilities do. It is in fact their mission. And part of their planning is how to effectively integrate mobile load into the picture. Batteries are energy storage. That's the grail of making the grid more efficient, and making that technology work, and ultimately getting to the unicorn of effective bidirectional charging, where batteries can send electricity back to the grid is important. In the meantime, they can be grid firming in the fact that they can store intermittent, i.e. renewable sources of energy. So there's a big piece on that grid side. And just because it's really early and it's dark, I'm going to get really nerdy on you and say that there's also a piece of the grid part that I don't think people are appreciating, is that the supply chain for the grid has also been challenging. There's a 2-year wait to get transformer equipment. So if you want to be creating interconnections to serve a big truck fleet charging center, there's a challenge there. So that's a mechanical challenge. And as everyone knows, the charging station experience, we need more charging. What kind of charging we'll need will vary over time. Will we keep getting bigger and bigger batteries because people feel more comfortable carrying around all of their energy? Or the fact is, it's still true, 80% of charging happens at home and at work. And we have to solve that problem. And I could just blather on for a while, give these guys a chance to talk about it.
Any thoughts on energy storage, vehicle to grid? Yeah?
Yeah, I think just as Genevieve said perfectly, that there is equally an opportunity as much as there is a challenge with increasing EV adoption, whereby those EVs become virtual power plants that can help firm up the grid, that can be tapped into as an additional source of power supply. Speaking from my own experience and living in Canada, where we have harsh winters and often long distances to drive between locations. A big challenge for us is the long charging time for EVs, even at fast charging stations. Some can take upwards of 40 minutes to charge, and when you factor in minus 30 temperatures and the reduction in range you'll get, it makes it challenging to go and see family that's 500 kilometers away. So I think I'm alluding to Amir's value proposition here and how he can potentially solve some of that going forward. But that is a big challenge. And where there is that challenge, there is that opportunity as well. So that's important to remember.
I was at the solar trade show, the big solar trade show last week in Vegas, and they have basically moved from solar energy to just renewable energy as a theme. And I would say half the trade show floor was batteries and storage, whether it was little portable storage that you take on your camping trip, or the side of your house is one big huge battery. But one of the things that struck me is that GM was there with their battery storage, Tesla was there with their battery storage, BYD, a Chinese car maker, was there with their home storage solution. So it's possible that because this is such a strategic part of electrification of vehicles, that the car makers have gone out and said, well, I guess we have to solve this ourselves. And we'll start, with the Ford One Lightning, we'll start using this battery here to charge other things. And we need to take care of the energy problem because no one else is doing it for us. So one of the problems of having this strategic issue is who in the end has to solve it. And clearly it needs to be everybody, but I thought it was interesting to see the car makers doing that.
I think it's also important to note about the batteries, when they're at the end of their useful life in a vehicle, still have over 70% of their capacity. So you can use them in stationary applications, whether it's small or utility scale. So that is a market opportunity that folks are seeing. It's also a way to reclaim the value of all of those important pieces that we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
My only comment would be that when you mentioned that 80% of the charging is done at home or at work, it's reflecting, I think, today's situation when the early adopters that take the cars. But most places in most of the world, people don't have the privilege to charge their car overnight. They don't have garages. They don't have any place to charge the car next to their house, home, apartment, or where they work. So there is a need in dense places to have the, I call it infrastructure, not to do the manufacturing, but to do the delivery of a high power charging station to allow them to charge the cars. And this needs to be solved by the distribution of the power. So wherever in the different countries, it's sometimes the electric companies, sometimes it's the distribution companies, but putting charging stations in very dense urban places is a significant infrastructure challenge that we need to overcome. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult for the people that live in places that they don't have their own garage or cannot charge at home.
Absolutely.
They won't have the ability to buy.
The only way for us to get to a larger penetration is to that next tranche of market is the people who have cars but don't have garages. A quick show of hands. Has anyone here ever seen an electric charger at a gas station? Wow, so that's very interesting. Was that one of the three of you have in Israel? So that is a step towards solving this strategic supply challenge of energy. So that's, hopefully we will continue to see more of that, and taking out the gas pumps. Well, we don't need that many gas pumps anymore. There's not that many gas cars. Okay, now let's take a quick look at the battery supply chain. And Amir, I'll go to you first. You have a different chemistry, but you can probably also talk to the kind of traditional battery chemistry. And then I think, Ryan, you also can talk about mining and stuff like that. And these are, especially as we look forward in terms of demand curves, if we don't get the supply up, the prices are gonna be way out, and if the prices of these batteries continues to climb, we are not gonna get the EV penetration that we want. So where are the challenges historically, and then with the new chemistries that we think might be coming online?
Yeah, so I think the main challenge that we see today with the issue of supply is the balance between supply and demand. We see now huge investments all around the world to have the ability to do localization of manufacturing. If until today or until a few years ago, the main territories of manufacturing sales in the world was Korea, Japan, and China, for sure, when you look at the EV market, you cannot transport the batteries across the globe. So you need to localize the manufacturing facilities. So we see a lot of activities in Europe and in the United States to have more localized battery manufacturing facilities. This is very important because otherwise the EV manufacturer will have it very difficult to transport the batteries across the globe. The second challenge with regards to supply chain is, of course, the raw materials. I'll leave it later to the third bucket, but this is surely something that needs to be solved for the long run to understand how to manage the minerals that are needed. Again, looking at China, they took a decision for many reasons to focus on LFP. Some of it comes from maybe safety and durability, but the other flip side of their decision is probably more likely political. These are raw materials that are under their geography, territory, and they're not dependent on third parties. So
sounds like another industry that we've seen historically.
Correct. and as we mentioned in our conversation, when we look at the gasoline market and we look at OPEC, it was a few countries around the world that controlled the gasoline in the world. What we have today until the change is going to happen, if you ask me, it's even worse, because the control of the manufacturing of batteries today is much more concentrated in certain geographies. Only when we will have the ability to manufacture and have control in different territories of the battery manufacturing, then the free market and dependency on certain geographies would be limited, and then the situation would be much better for the industry.
Right. Are you talking specifically about a certain battery chemistry, certain particular minerals that are only found in certain part of the world? Or do you think that this applies to that future set of unknowns, sodium and silicon and all the other battery technologies that are coming?
In the end, it's a combination of both. So there are certain elements today that we know that they are very limited in certain geographies in the world. But in the end, the issue is who has the ability to do the manufacturing. So if for some reason you need to ship the lithium to different geographies around the world, if it's going to be controlled only by one geography, it's going to be a problem because usually most of the countries will try to protect their own industries. So the idea is to make sure that all geographies have the ability not dependent on the others. And this is a challenge currently.
Right. So Ryan, he's clearly focused on the manufacturing and that the risk in the supply chain and making sure that manufacturing is happening where it's being consumed. But I think minerals they're just where they are, right?
They are. Frankly, we live on an onion, and at best, with current mining technologies, we can go one skin deep. So minerals are everywhere. It's technology that is the challenge to access them. And it's also that there are exceptionally long lead times to develop new mines. So in a recent study looking back over the past 20 years at, I believe it was 127 mines that were developed, the average lead time from first discovery to first production was 16 years, which is exceptionally long. So in the context of all the heterogeneity that the market faces today, the variety of options and choices, and the inability to commit because of that, we're years behind before we've even started in building out the upstream supply chains that are needed. At the downstream end, An EV, as most of us probably appreciate, is not a commodity. EVs are not the same everywhere. In North America, the sales weighted average EV has a battery pack of somewhere around 85 kilowatt hours. In Asia, it's around 56. So as EV sales continue to grow in North America, that is going to have a hyper growth demand for the materials to produce those batteries. And with so much variety of cathode chemistries in particular on the horizon, miners don't know how much lithium they need to bring to market, how much nickel, how much cobalt. I think many had an idea of what was needed a few years ago, started to develop, in particularly nickel and cobalt assets around the world, but we've now seen, as Amir alluded to, this growing affinity for LFP, which does not contain nickel or cobalt, and has kind of taken the wind out of the sails of a lot of those advancements. So the market needs clear directions to invest and to get the supply chain construction started today. Otherwise, bottlenecks are inevitable, shortages are inevitable, and those that are waiting to be led by the pull of the market will soon find themselves without the supplies and supply chains they need.
Oh my gosh, I feel terrible. Like, we need to, like, this is 16 years on new mines and 2 years on transformers. Clearly, we need to put our innovative hats on and try and solve this problem with technology. So then the next supply chain, and this, you led me right into it, is kind of the traditional parts supply chain. So EV motors is a new piece of that, but we have concerns there as well. The chip shortage, I think, is the traditional supply chain where we did have problems, and they're continuing to trickle through all the way to vehicle production. So Ryan, do you have any thoughts on how the traditional supply chain and the parts the challenges that we're facing there, and then maybe how we can try and solve them?
Sure, absolutely. So if buttoning up your battery supply chain doesn't sound like a daunting enough task, it's equally important that OEMs tackle similar challenges on the motor side of things. So there's three main types of electric vehicle traction motors in commercial use today. There's permanent magnet motors, there's induction motors, and electrically excited synchronous motors. Permanent magnet motors are in 90% of all EVs produced to date because they are the most efficient. They use the least amount of battery capacity to do a mile of driving or a kilometer of driving. So if OEMs are unable to secure the rare earth permanent magnets that are used in those motors going forward and need to switch to an alternative motor type instead, then that is going to create a need for them to upsize their battery packs to continue meeting the driving range that their incumbents are meeting and that their customers expect. So there is this blind spot interconnectedness between battery and motor supply chains, which collectively form one powertrain, but are often considered to be in different silos. So I could go further into the microchip issue, but I think you get the point. There are many components in the EV that are often thought of as being in their own silos, but they affect each other. And if we do not have the microchips we need for EVs, well, then battery materials go into surplus, rare earth magnets go into surplus. So everything needs to function kind of like a Swiss watch, whereby all of these materials are different cogs and need to move in perfect harmony, or that machine stops moving.
Right. All right, so clearly we're not the only ones that have been thinking about this. There's probably plenty of people in the audience, and specifically in the US, the government, right? The government said, oh, darn, we have these strategic supply chain issues, both from a component and a mineral standpoint, but also from an IP and geopolitical risk. So they came up, among other things, with the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS Act, which hopefully you guys, like I, think, well, this is a good step in the right direction. Genevieve, you're kind of our Washington, D.C. expert here. Do you think that we have a good solution here? Is it a half solution? Is it just lip service? Will it help us?
It absolutely will help. And it's an important, enormous step forward. It's a critical piece of moving forward. All of those federal investments and those market signals are reinforcing private investment. And as, to the conversation before this, what we need to be doing is diversifying supply chains. That's not only like the materials content, but the refining and processing ability. And that's about partnerships, it's about money, it's about technology and R&D. And there's parts of that included in all of those major pieces of legislation, particularly the Inflation Reduction Act, which has an enormous amount of incentives for U.S. manufacturing, for exploration, for production. I have a slide that shows all the pieces, and I'll be showing that at my next, performance at this event. But in the meantime, there is, we're looking at billions of dollars, and since 2021, there's been $210 billion of investment in U.S. Supply chain announced. We are also working, the government is working.
210 billion through the IRA? Or because it's
in the
made a
window
nice,
after that. Now,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say like all of this, the timing.
Right, but you're saying
that is
it's given-
plans for investment in building manufacturing in place, but that is new money that was announced since 2021. Depending on who you're a fan of in Washington, maybe you can say, you can draw your own cause and effect lines. But there is enormous amount of energy. The DOE and DOD, for instance, are investing enormously in graphite in Alaska, in new extracting lithium from geothermal brines. So from all ends of this ecosystem of electric transportation, the federal government is pushing forward. And as you all probably know too, state policy is a big part of this too. They're driving production requirements, purchase requirements, creating incentives for consumers. So the policy piece of this is really important. But I would say again, it's not if, not when. Policy is a driver. It can accelerate this, the move to electrification, but it will happen. The question is just, will we make it or buy it?
Right. Does it exclude our friends in Israel and our friends in Canada?
So the point I want to mention with regards to the incentives is that at least me as a user that also talks with manufacturers, we see that this IRA Act really shifted a lot of investments that were supposed to be in other places in the world towards the United States. I do want to mention one thing that I thought about it recently, is the new facilities, battery manufacturing facilities which are built in Europe versus the ones that are built in Northern America have a certain difference. The Northern American business model is more partnering with ones that are already manufacturing, while in Europe you see newcomers. Most of the facilities that are being built in Europe are by companies that are building it from scratch. I can mention names, I don't think it's important right now, but the fact is that in the United States, I can think of only one company right now that is a newcomer that is building their own manufacturing facilities. All the others is a part of a joint venture with other currently manufacturing company. Now, I can't say if this is the right way or the wrong way. I'm sure there's cons and pros for everywhere.
Is the building that's going on in Europe also under a similar kind of do-it-yourself policy from the governments?
So the biggest one now in Europe is the ACC, which is a combination of two car brands together with the governments of Germany and France and Italy. You have Northvolt, which is supported by the Norwegian government, but has also a lot of private investors. There was one in British Volt that unfortunately was not able to complete their vision. There's another one in, I can mention a few, but the business model that we see in the United States is much different. So we see a lot of most of them are based from Korea that are coming here and doing joint ventures with other EV companies here and building the facilities in the United States. So yes, it's the geography is the United States, but no, I don't want to say the motivation, but the control over the technology, from my perspective, when I look from the side, I'm not so confident who still controls the technology, the geography or the mother company.
Right. And we did see some reclarification and some double reclarification, and we're still working on, for the IRA, I think, what is American and what's friendly, what's onshoring, what's nearshoring and friendshoring. So I think that's still how far we let that money travel for bringing innovation into the United States. How about, what's your take on the IRA?
Yeah. So you asked up front if the IRA stands to benefit Canada, and I think it certainly does upstream. So Canada is a natural resource-rich country. The States needs those resources currently to fulfill its ambitions in the EV space. So in that sense, it stands to benefit. At the other end of the supply chain, there's a lot of competition happening right now to capture investments for new battery factories, for EV factories. So at that end of the supply chain, there's more competition happening. I just wanted to add something that I think is important. What COVID has shown us over the past couple of years is that the just-in-time globalized economy does not work. It can quickly break down at times when we have a pandemic or something of that nature. So not only do we need local supply chains, we need to build out redundancy in those regions, which translates to higher costs, lower utilization rates, but it's a necessity. I think if we don't recall how dire and how broken supply chains became over the past 2 years, then we are destined to fall into that trap again, whether it's 5 years or 50 years from now. So
It's true, but do the car companies want to take on that extra supply chain and the risk for, the risk management for what if the supply chain breaks down? And I think that's one of the reasons that the government has this CHIPS Act and other things, is we can't really expect the car makers to be taking on that cost. But so moving on, what about the story of new tech and new innovation and startups? The ability, we have so many startups over on the show floor, a lot of them who have, they've said this is a strategic issue for the industry, for the economy, for the climate, and here's our solution. Do you think the companies who are already entrenched, the companies that you're trying to sell to, Amir, are they afraid of startups? Are they open to new technologies that are completely out of the box for solving some of these strategic imperatives? Any examples? If you believe it's true, do you have any examples?
So I won't mention names, but I think we can see the difference between the DNA of the EV companies. It's a very traditional industry, and we as startups usually work in a much faster pace. Now, if there's alignment between the paces of the two companies, then for sure new technologies can be introduced really, really fast. It's not always that way. In some cases, we encounter the heaviness of such blue chip companies, which I understand where it comes from, but it's going to be very difficult unless they will change their mindset to have the ability to introduce relatively fast new technologies into the market. So it really depends. So some of them do run fast, some of them run a little bit slower, some of them are slow.
Right.
I do want also to mention one thing that was mentioned before, that if we have the ability to do fast charging, then we can have certain car models with a much smaller pack size. And by that, saving a lot of raw materials and weight of the car. So the car becomes more efficient, and the cost of the car becomes much cheaper because the battery is around 45% of the bill of material of the car. So if we can build cars that can charge fast, then we don't have the problem of the range anxiety, and then the main anxiety that we need to work on is the charging. And if we solve that, we can have cars with much smaller packs, which can really help the environment and the supply chain.
Yeah, that's a startup example of the battery swapping. We've seen a couple of startups come and go. That the idea was, let's get rid of range anxiety altogether, and just you drive into a thing and you get a new battery. That didn't fly. Who knows? Maybe something will happen in the future. It will. But there are so many ideas out there. I've seen tiny little ammonia cracking devices that can turn ammonia into hydrogen that gets used for electric charging of a vehicle. We've seen, just because my work with startups, we've seen fantastic ideas for storage, for DC to DC charging, for putting inside a parking spot some induction charging so that the entire parking lot can charge cars as they come in. So I do think that we have all of these strategic issues that we need to solve, and that we're not going to get to electrification of all these fleets, and that's an entirely different conversation. Fleets are super important. Like, if you add all of the vehicles up everywhere, the consumer vehicle is really a small portion of what's out there on the roads. And we didn't even have time, and our time is up, but we didn't even have time to talk about fleets. But I'm relatively optimistic, and I think that will be my closing question to you guys. So let's say 2040. Let's say 2040. How do you think? Are you optimistic or pessimistic that we hit full electrification of the new vehicles by 2040?
Very, very optimistic, despite my messaging perhaps suggesting otherwise. I'm convinced there will absolutely be ups and downs along the way. There'll be challenges that must be overcome. But if we just take this time point in 2040, we're going to be in a much better position and nearly fully electrified at that point. So very optimistic.
I'll surprise you. I have a strong feeling it's going to be much before. I'll give you an example from a different industry, from the mobile industry. When in 2007, Apple introduced the iPhone, and there was a lot of 3G networks, and everybody says, how everything's going to fall, everything's going to break down. Nobody's going to stand with all the data streaming that is going to be needed. And the change to 4G and 5G came so fast. I want to believe that now, when governments and companies see the challenge that we have, smart people will find the smart solutions. And I believe that it's going to be way before 2040, when all the new cars going on the road are going to be electrified. This is my opinion.
Great.
I'll be quick. I'm extremely optimistic, and the fact is, technology, markets, policy, all moving in the same direction, solving the problems as they arise, and we'll get there. And whatever you mean by fully electrified, the trajectory is moving in the right direction.
Great. So what I've understood is huge challenges, but everyone here, we're up for the challenge, and we'll make it happen. Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your insight. I hope you guys did too.
Thank you.
These guys will be around for questions on the side and in the back. All right?